This episode is proudly supported by Powerhouse Parramatta.
Powerhouse Parramatta will open in 2025. The new museum will be the largest in New South Wales and is determined to offer the very best in hospitality. Perhaps your business can be part of defining a food and beverage offering which is expected to cater to 2 million visitors a year. This incredible opportunity for operators includes retail food and beverage, in-house residential catering, events and other hospitality ventures, encapsulating the diversity of cuisines and cultures that make Western Sydney so exciting. Interested to learn more? Powerhouse invites food and beverage operators to a briefing on Tuesday, 8th of August. For more information and to register for this exclusive briefing, go to powerhouse.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Dja Dja Wurrung, Tung Wurrung and Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present.
So there's a really great invigoration in the region with more young winemakers and young viticulturalists up here, and we're really very fortunate that we're only an hour's drive from 5 million people of Melbourne.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Ben Ranken has extensive experience in winemaking both in Australia and around the world. His label Wilimee combines his vast experience in the cellars with his hands-on approach as vigneron. I've been following Ben's career for numerous years and always look forward to what he unearths in his home of the Macedon Ranges. Hi, Ben. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, good to be here, Shanteh. Nice to hear your voice.
I'm really thrilled. Thank you. I know you're incredibly busy at the moment in your winery. How did this morning's Pinot Noir press going?
Actually, believe it or not, I'm still pressing. So, it's going well. At the very end of the press, so it's no problem at all. But no, I've only got 2 more to go, and then we're probably close to the end of the harvest, which is great.
Fantastic. I can already hear the beers being cracked open and the celebrations beginning.
Yeah, I think so. It's been a long and arduous vintage this year. Been a very unusual one. Just been obviously with a La Nina event again, as most Australian winemakers would understand. The cooler years are always more challenging than the easy warm years.
Yeah. It's been a bit of everything everywhere, and I was going to ask you of that. So, how do you prepare for that? Is it just that you've just got to make sure you've got time in the winery to be picking things at the right time, or how do you get yourself organised?
Well, you need to cross your fingers and pray. And you have to have lots of patience. It's very much a patience year. Here in the Macedon Ranges, in particular, we're obviously, the coldest region on mainland Australia, and probably colder than a lot of Tassie as well. And I know the Taswegians won't be happy hearing me say that, but the fact is we are. And really, we're just looking at, I've got 4 different weather apps, and you're trying to get a gauge on what's happening with the weather next week and the week after, and you have to have a lot of patience because it's a very slow ripening season here, particularly in a wet, cool year, and really try and manage picking around those rain events, which can be a challenge, particularly in the back of COVID with the challenges of finding workers for picking. That's been really tough for everyone in the business, I think, around the country, and so you're sort of predicting to pick 2-3 weeks out by booking the contractors in to try and preempt a picking date. And then, at the last minute, you're cancelling and pushing it out again. It's pretty tough. It's been very logistically challenging, and I think patience is the key in these cooler areas to try and find that right window before a rain event, obviously when the fruit's ripe, and then fingers crossed you can get the pickers to pick at the right time. And that's been one of the big challenges and headaches that's in the industry and probably all horticultural farm industries for the last couple of years. It's been a massive challenge for everyone, really.
Absolutely. And I can't imagine how, like you said, you have to be patient, but it's one thing to say that and another to do it. And I imagine a bit like a watch pot, never boils. Do you just wander through the vines, or do you try to do something else that's completely different to get your mind off of just kind of standing around? What do you do?
Well, you chase birds to keep them off the crop. No, it's a good question, actually. Look, we had a slight change in direction this year. We knew we were having a very low yield again for the third year in a row. So I've had to sort of subsidise a bit of our income by buying a bit of Heathcote fruit. So last year and this year, so that sort of got our harvest going a bit earlier than normal. And so really we had something to do in the cellar with I had a bit of Fiano and a bit of Shiraz to muck around with, and then really in the vineyard it's just really just patience, checking the nets, making sure the birds don't get in, and waiting really. And that's been really, everyone's impatient naturally, so you want to get off and running. And then really everyone was in a rush to get everything off before Easter, because it was a rain at the end of Easter, so about 10 days ago. And so luckily we got all our fruit off just before that rain. So that was a relief actually, because 62 mils of rain is a fair bit, and that would have been set us back a couple of weeks, and then provided some botrytis problems and all that sort of stuff. So really, there's so much luck in winemaking. You've got to cross your fingers and your toes, and as I said, have a lot of patience.
Wow. Yeah. It doesn't sound easy, and the anxiety I imagine in some of those years must be pretty hectic. But you seem like a pretty patient person in general. Ben, I wanted to talk a little bit about how you got your start in winemaking. We met, I think for the first time, was actually way back in 2012 when you were making wine for Gali Estate, which is a big operation. So talk us through kind of, where you got your start in wine, and where you've been brought to today, where you're making wines under your own label.
Yeah, well, really, I started in wine with my parents having a vineyard. They planted one of the first vineyards in the New South Wales region of Tumbarumba in the foothills of Kosciuszko. So I really had a start there, not in winemaking but in viticulture, and that was really mum and dad diversifying on the farm. And really, I went to uni in Melbourne doing engineering, surveying, cartography, and drank a lot of beer and had a lot of fun, and realised this is not for me. I better go and make the stuff that I'm drinking. So I fell into winemaking in that regard, and that was the best thing I ever did. And worked in the Yarra as my first harvest down there while I was studying by correspondence, which is what most winemakers do. And then like every Aussie, we all love travelling, and instead of doing the Kentuckys or the 2-year stint in London, I was able to spend the next 8 years sort of travelling between hemispheres from wine region to wine region in Europe and America. And that was all obviously easy to do while you're young and single. So, so really that's a pretty brief story of where I went. And then I ended up finding myself at Gali Estate, which is on the west side of Melbourne in Sunbury, and also Heathcote. And I think we met when we were doing the Lorenzo Galli Scholarship in a masterclass in Italian wines 10 years ago, Shanteh. So I've had an amazing passion and influence with the Italian varieties of what's going on in Australia. And then we bought our farm here, one of the oldest vineyards in Macedon. Back in 2013, my wife and I bought that property, and that was sort of halfway between my job and the vineyard in Heathcote. So that sort of suited great. And then I made wine for a lot of people, contract winemaking at Gali Estate, and one of those clients was a little vineyard here in Romsey in Macedon called Mount Monument. And the owner of that property and vineyard is Nonda Katsoulides, who's the architect who designed Mona down in Tassie and Eureka, one of the highest buildings in Melbourne. And so this is his property, and he said, come on board, Ben, we're going to build a winery, sell it to a restaurant. So COVID put it back a year, but we're about to open, actually. We had our soft opening last week, and which is really exciting. And we've done a mini Mona here at Mount Monument with lots of sculptures on the property, and I've made the first wines in the winery proper here. I was using neighbouring wineries at Curly Flat and Kilchurn, making Wilimee and Mount Monument for the last 2 years with their facilities, and now this year we're able to do it ourselves. So that's been really exciting, and now I've got a real foothold in Macedon, and I love the synergies going back to where I grew up at Tumbarumba, being a cold climate area, mostly sparkling based varieties here, Chardonnay, Pinot are the predominant varieties. And my first vintage overseas was Burgundy, so I did a stint in New York, upstate New York, in the Finger Lakes, which is also Pinot, Chard, Riesling, all cold varieties. So I've sort of always been cold climate person, so this is where I've ended up.
Amazing. Yeah, it's kind of come full circle, which I love that.
It has indeed, yes.
I was going to ask you a bit. I mean, I've loved the wines that you do at Mount Monument, and I feel that there is a synergy between the wines that you have produced. We've always kind of had a little bit of your fingerprint in a really wonderful way, not necessarily in a winemaking sense, but in a feel and a almost a flavour sense. So, and working with Chardonnay and Pinot Noir makes a lot of sense. But it wasn't until I went on your website and I just did a little refresh, and I was like, hang on a minute, what's this? Shiraz and Fiano, and I was like, that's only just happened. What? How do I not know about this? So how have you found working with, just moving into some of those Heathcote varieties? And I mean, it's been wonderful that you've been able to get your hands on some fruit, especially in these hard vintages. And how have you found those?
Yeah, well, obviously I've had a lot of experience in the Heathcote region with my previous job at Galley Estate, having a vineyard up there, and we had Fiano up there, and we had other Italian varietals like Sangiovese, Nebbiolo, Montepulciano, etc. And obviously Shiraz, that's what Heathcote's obviously famous for. So I've been involved in that region for a good 10 plus years, so I know a lot of the growers and a lot of the people up there, and so it was good. It's been great getting my foot back into Heathcote again and to buy just a few tonnes and muck around with it. And really it's only come about because I've had 3 tiny vintages here at Wilimee and Macedon. And I was like, well, I need a bit of extra income here because these small yields don't do us any help with paying the mortgage. So
got to be done.
Exactly right. But it's also great. I really love Fiano as a white variety, and I think it's got so much potential in this country. And a place like Heathcote, which is obviously a warm growing region, the natural high acidities, which is what Macedon's about, it's high acidities. You don't have to play around with the acid side of things. Shiraz you do, obviously, because it's a warm climate variety. But I've tried to make Shiraz in a bit more of a juicy, crunchy, more approachable style, medium-bodied rather than the big full-bodied Heathcote Shirazes. And then Fiano with a bit of texture. Barrel ferment, leave it on gross lees in barrel for 12 months. Rack on the new moon to bottle, so trying to keep it I guess that's a bit more of my philosophy across the board, is reflecting the vineyard more than the winemaking than anything else, and I think that's paramount. Is the fruit is the vineyard, and our job as winemakers is to try and capture that in a bottle, the vineyard, rather than any influence of the hand of the winemaker.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can't wait to see them because I am really interested to see your take. And like you said, Fiano's going great guns in quite a few regions, and I'm really excited to see where it goes because we are seeing a lot of people get behind it. And like you said, it's well suited to a few different climates in Australia. So very exciting times.
Yeah, I think with Fiano too, there's a couple of different styles there. Like people are making it like Sauv Blanc, which is sort of, keep it in stainless steel, keep it fresh, bottle it early and keep it, vibrant. And others are doing what I'm doing, which is more like Chardonnay, in the barrel, wild ferment, leave it there for 12 months and bring more texture to the wine rather than that crunchiness that Sauv Blanc would have. So that's really going to be quite interesting to see where Fiano goes in Australia and what consumers are more akin to, whether that's the textural side of things or the bright, vibrant, Sauv Blanc sort of style.
Or whether we just get a bit of both and then it continues on in two veins. But I want to talk about the Macedon. It is one of my favourite regions to drink from in the whole of Australia, and I still haven't been down there, which is terrible of me.
You better change that.
Oh, definitely, especially now that you've got these amazing facilities about Monument. But tell me about the Macedon Ranges. Why is it so special?
Oh, look, really, really simple. It's as I said, it's an hour from Melbourne, which is amazing, and very few people in Melbourne even realise we're here. Everyone goes sort of east or southeast to Yarra and Mornington, but we're on the Great Dividing Range. We're a high elevation. Well, for Australia, we are. Most vineyards are above 600 metres. We're obviously a cold climate, so it's a really beautiful region for Chard and Pinot, and obviously sparkling-based varieties. And it's a very tiny region. Like it's only probably about maybe as a crow flies 30 to 40 kilometres from north to south, but it's sort of a wide region, probably about 60 kilometres from east to west. So that's sort of following the Great Divide as it hooks around the bottom of Victoria towards the Grampians. Really, there's such very few producers in this region. There's less than 40, and I think the total crush out of the region is about 1,500 tonnes on average. And to put that into perspective for some of your viewers, a small winery in Australia anywhere would produce 1,000, 2,000 tonnes, and they're still considered medium to small. In the Yarra Valley, the De Bortleys, when I was there 20 years ago, we were doing 5,000 tonnes. Domaine Chandon, about the same, 5,000 tonnes. That's just one or two wineries in the Yarra. That's for example anyway, to give you a bit of perspective. In this whole region is 1,500 tonnes. So everyone's a small bespoke producer. There's a lot of the old school producers are slowly passing on to the next generation, or they're moving on themselves, and other young people are able to come in and buy that vineyard or buy that fruit. And so there's a really great invigoration in the region with more young winemakers and young viticulturists up here. And we're really very fortunate that we're only, an hour's drive from, 5 million people of Melbourne. So that's great. And people are coming up to Hanging Rock as well. And also, obviously, Daylesford to the west is a very popular little town in the region. But really Chard and Pinot and a little bit of Riesling as well, probably the three main key varieties in this region. And as a winemaker, I think all winemakers love to make those three varieties. If they had their chance to make some premium wine, they'd be the three premium varieties you'd probably choose. Most of us would. Definitely.
Want to make them, and they want to drink them for sure.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, make and drink, very important. So, and it's great, we have some great iconic vineyards here. Bindi obviously has been here for 20, 30 years, and it's arguably one of the best Pinots in the country, and Curly Flat aren't far behind, and they've been reinvigorated with Matt Harrop there and making amazing Pinots again. And then you've got the new people like the Josh Cooper. He's the son of Cobor Ridge, so he's reinvigorated Cobor Ridge, and then his own brand, and the Dilworth and the Lanes, to other little places like Lyons Will and so forth. So Passing Clouds. There's some lovely little wineries, and the people in this region are fantastic. We're quite a close-knit little community of winemakers, and that's another really important part of the region. It's just great people.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you in that there is a real sense of community, but also, like you said, you hear the word boutique thrown around willy-nilly these days, and it tends to not mean anything to me at times, but you really can't deny that the labels from the Macedon have that real handcrafted boutique feel about them, and such premium wines as well. And I hope that with the development and things like this podcast going out, that people recognize and visit the region, but that it doesn't become overburdened with just huge tourism that kind of destroys the sense of it, because it is precious. But at the same time, you can't really blame people who can't keep secrets like this for yourself all the time.
No,
as much as I'd like to.
I know what you mean. I sort of see like Macedon's like where the Yarra was 30 years ago, well before the Yarra was developed and became the tourist. And good luck to them, well done to them. But Macedon is just so tiny. But I don't envisage any big corporates because the land is expensive. Also, there's as we are a cold region and lots of little valleys and so forth, there's lots of frost zones. So there's lots of area here which you would be crazy to plant a vineyard in. You really need a little bit of elevation on the slope, so you get that airflow to avoid those spring frosts, because that is the biggest issue in the region. And then also another reason we came up here was because with climate change, being a cool region, we've got pretty good water here, and that sort of I'm looking to the future. Whether my daughters take on the business after me or whoever does, they'll still have a viable business in the years to come with respect to climate change. It's sort of benefited us in a way, which is really crazy to say, but it's brought our harvest forward from May into early April, late March. So hence more viable for table wines in this region. Years like this year, we're back to mid to late April in harvesting, and there's still some vineyards in the region that are higher elevations here that are still another couple of weeks away from picking Pinot and Chardonnay. So it is a viable region to the future, and that's really exciting as well. So, but there's a lot of areas which aren't akin to wine because of frosts and so forth. So it is very bespoke and very niche little region.
Yeah, it sounds like a bit of local knowledge would never go astray if you're looking to invest in the area. I want to talk about two of your, I want to talk about all your wines. I mean, your Chardonnays, I literally wax lyrical about your Chardonnay. Anyone that knows me knows I absolutely adore them. But let's talk about underwater Pinot Noir, because that's really exciting, and I really think that we'd love to hear from you about that. So the process of élevage of wines below sea level is something that has been done in a few places around the world. But where did this little experiment for you come about, and how did you go about it?
Yeah, right. Great. Good question. Well, I came about it, nearly 20 years ago when I was working in the Yarra Valley at the Bortleys, and Steve Webber, the owner and boss there, winemaker, he'd just been over to Spain and had one of those wines to drink, and he was waxing lyrical about it, how exciting it was. And I was like, wow, I'd love to give this a try. So it's one of those things that's been in the back of my mind for 20 years, and I haven't had the opportunity to taste any underwater wine or to make any underwater wine. So hence, when we bought Wilimee, I was like, wow, righto, now's my chance to unveil that secret I've had in the back of my mind for 20 years and see what happens and see what it's like, because I hadn't really tasted any of those wines. I wanted to find out, well, what's the go? So I had some clean skin Shiraz actually at my old job at Galley Estate, and I put half a dozen in a bucket to see how those wines would go underwater and they were underwater for 4 years, just in a bucket of water, and the screw caps had completely rusted. So I realised that screw caps were not viable for underwater maturation, so I had to go with cork, well, Diam natural cork. So that's the reason why our Wilimee Pinot is in cork. So 2015 was our first vintage at Wilimee, and after a year in barrel, after being bottled clean skin in the winter of 2016, I was able to put 20% of our Wilimee Pinot underwater. And at Wilimee, because we bought an old existing vineyard and also winery, there was a existing winery there. So there's 3 5,000 litre wine tanks there, and that's where I store the wine underwater. I was tempted to go to the ocean, but because that's where everyone else does it in the world, and that's where you hear the stories about shipwrecks, obviously, in the ocean. But I decided to not do that because I knew someone, some diver would eventually find it and nick it while they're looking for lobster or whatever. and also, I'm not much of a diver, so I wasn't really going to go an hour and a half, 2-hour drive down to the coast to bury some wine in the ocean. So hence, I think probably the only person in the world doing freshwater. I wasn't going to do it in our dam because our dam's our life source of our property, and I only have one dam, and it's spring fed in the winter with winter rain. So I didn't want to dredge that dam or anything like that. So hence I use those wine tanks, fill it up with dam water, and there I've left the wine for 5 years underwater maturing. So last winter was the 5-year mark of our 2015 Pinot, and I chose 5 years because well, obviously you hear the stories of 100 years in the ocean, and obviously can't wait 100 years, like the shipwreck analogy. So I thought, well, look, what's a nice round number? 1 or 2 years is probably not going to be long enough. It's going to be a bit of a marketing gimmick. Wines don't evolve or change that much in 1 or 2 years. So I chose 5 years to see how it would go. And obviously I've done it every year since 2015, so I've been able to pull out a bottle every year and have a taste myself to see how it evolves. But I like the roundness of 5 years. I've kept a few bottles underwater for a few extra years from the 15 vintage to see how it evolves, and we'll see how that tracks. But so one thing we found that being underwater is that it slowed the maturation of the wine. So when comparing it to the control, which is the same wine in the cellar, and I've been able to sell a few bottles to clients and customers, a bottle of each, so they can compare and taste the difference themselves. But the general consensus has been is that the wine underwater has been fresher, maintaining its fruit and so forth, but the structure has slightly changed because of the pressure of being underwater. But interestingly, when doing a bit of research about all the underwater people doing underwater wines in Europe in particular, they're all saying that the wines mature more quickly. So you're actually seeing a young wine looking older than what it is. And in the evidence that I've seen with Wilimee Pinot, it's the inverse. So there's a couple of theories to that, and it's all, again, this is the thing, it's very much speculation and theorised. But in a tank with fresh water, 150 kilometres from the ocean, there's no current, there's no wine movement, apart from natural movement in the tank from the influence of the moon, which is not that great. Whereas in the ocean, you've got the tidal movement and also current movement. So the wines are constantly being moved in the bottle underwater at whatever depth it may be. So I think that has a large bearing on the maturation of the wine. I also can't see how the wines in the ocean would be more forward and drinking like the more aged, because when you hear about the stories of someone drinking 100-year-old champagne that's been underwater for 100 years, the wine still looks fresh and vibrant, not like a 300-year-old wine. So with that, I'm thinking, well, those champagnes in the shipwreck are probably buried in the mud, so therefore they're not as not having that tidal and hence current movement of the wines moving so much because they're actually in the mud. But again, I'm only theorising this. It's a bit, we're trying to figure out why our wines look fresher and more vibrant than the control, as opposed to the guys doing the same thing in the ocean. Maybe it's also because I'm doing Pinot. I don't know why it is that no one else is doing Pinot. Everyone else they're doing more Mediterranean varieties rather than Pinot. So maybe it's because I'm doing Pinot. I don't know. It's really interesting to try and figure all this out. And these conversations have been more prevalent in the last 12 months since I released that wine last September. So I'll release the the 2016 Pinot, which is 5 years underwater this coming September, October. And I'm guessing we'll have lots more conversations about why the wines, look fresher, or some people may think they don't. But it's really great conversations to have.
It really is, and I think that, I could feel like we could chat about this for another couple of hours, because I'm fascinated by it. I'm a bit of a diver, so I can imagine, coming across your wines just off the coast and, grabbing a lobster and a little drink would be pretty awesome. But at the same time, I always thought that maybe that kind of slower evolution had to do with maybe kind of pressure depth. But, a lot of the great wines of the world have been a result of them being out to the elements, things like Madeira over a passage of time, being left in the sun in barrels. So I think that, this is just a natural progression of where we can see wine going. And like you said, whether it be that it is slower evolution or greater colour density, it's fascinating that you're doing it and that you're spending the time. And like you said, it's not easy to put some of those bottles down going, well, they could be stuffed and, I could be selling them.
Yeah, totally. But if you don't take any risks in business or in life, you're never going to have the reward. So, you got to give it a go, and that's what I did. So it was fun doing it, and it's fun still doing it, and I'm going to have great conversations over the many years to come with people like yourself and also our clients who be drinking and tasting those wines and getting that feedback. But like in anything, you've got to give it a go and see what happens. So it's fun doing it.
Absolutely. And look, the wine's sold out, which is fantastic. And like you said, in September, you're going to release your 16s for anybody that's savvy enough to be online and grab a couple of bottles. There is a limit on how many you're selling, which I like, because people get to share them around a little bit more as well. That's
important, definitely, yeah, for sure.
I think there is 3 bottles of the 15 maybe available at Key if anybody is going by that way to have and wants a little cheeky sample of the 15. But I just really commend you for doing such a thing, and I think it leaves room for so much conversation, especially over a glass of wine, having a chat. I'd love to do it. But let's also talk about your Blanc de Blanc releases as well, because, again, talking about patience, I knew you were a patient man because you've released some 1995 with Long Time on Lee's sparkling wine. How did all that go? And how did you want to add sparkling to the portfolio? It sounds like a natural progression, but you tell me.
Well, really, it's actually, again, coming back to a similar story with the Fiano and Shiraz, because we've had 3 tiny vintages, I've had to sort of look for alternative ideas. And an opportunity came about because I was making the wines at Kilchurn, which is the old Coate Williams vineyard here in Macedon. Gordon Coate Williams, the owner of that vineyard, he passed away of old age at the beginning of COVID, and his sons put his cellar up for sale. And because I was making some wines there, I was able to have a bit of a look at what they had in the cellar. And really, this is credit to Gordon Coate Williams more than anyone else, but it was his Blanc de Blanc from 1995, and I was only first year out of school in 1995, so I didn't make the wine. But no, so it's his fruit, his wine. And he had, obviously, I don't know how or why, but had forgotten about that. There was a whole pallet of it, of Magnums and also bottles, actually, 750ml bottles. So I was able to taste, there was also 1994 Blanc de Blanc, and I was able to taste those wines. And the 94 bottle and Magnum were buggered. The 95 bottles were over the hill, but the 95 Magnum looked awesome, and I was like, "Whoa, hello, this is going to be great." So there was only 38 dozen in the pallet, so I bought the 38 dozen, and then I got together a great friend of mine, ex-sommelier of the Van Handel Group down here in Melbourne at the Stokehouse. His name's Link Riley. He has a little restaurant up in Bendigo called Harvest, and I was like, Link, come down and have a look at this and help me do dosage, so he and I sat down together and worked out dosage for the Blanc de Blancs. And there was also a 2013 bottle that I also bought from their Coate Williams cellar as well. And so we looked at it, and after about an hour we're like, these wines don't need any dosage. They just need to be 0, so no sugar. Awesome. We just added a bit of sulphur when we took the cap off to put the cork and wire on, because they're quite fragile, those wines, so you needed to protect them a little bit with that process of disgorging. And voila, that was it. So it was a easy process in the end, but it was good having Link there with me to draw on his expertise on Blanc de Blanc sparklings, because look, I'm a still winemaker, not a sparkling winemaker. So it was really opportunity, in all honesty. And then we had to design a new label. So my wife painted something abstract. She's a bit of an artistic person, so whacked that on the label, and so it's had 26 years on lees, that 1995 Magnum and Blanc de Blanc, and we just put it out there on the market just before Christmas last year. And to be honest with you, I've still got a few bottles because I haven't been out and about showing restaurateurs or anyone really because of with COVID lockdowns here in Melbourne. I've been so busy here in the vineyard, I haven't really shown many people, so there's still a few bottles around of that Blanc de Blanc, but it looks delicious. It's a great example of aged Australian Chardonnay, looking at 26, 27-year-old Chardonnay, and the acidity. I mean, obviously you're going to have the acidity being sparkling, but the fruit on it is, I recommend people drinking it out of a Chardonnay glass or a big sort of balloon glass, not a flute glass. You want to experience it, the aged Chardonnay characters with obviously the fizz and the effervescence of sparkling. So, it's a really great little project, an opportunity that I came across, and I was very lucky to stumble across that opportunity.
Oh, so fantastic. I mean, I know when I saw your release of those, I was like, what, how, and where has this all come from? But yes, I want some. Like, immediately, yes.
Yeah, well, you don't get to see that very often. And I'm like, this is really interesting Australian history, and you can drink it. And that's what I love about wine. You hear the story about Thomas Jefferson. You know that well. You can theoretically buy a wine that he drank back in 1787. And, there's very few products or very few things you can do that, and that's the beauty of lovely aged wine. If it ages well, it's great to taste history. You're drinking history. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's moments that you think that you really need to savor, but to have a something special with someone, I think everything slows down a little bit sometimes, and it helps you just savor an important moment when you can just kind of, narrow your focus from this big wide world where we're just, saturated in all this abundance of flavors and smells and noise everywhere, and to just focus in on a glass sometimes and slow things down. And I just think it polarizes moments more.
I like that. You're spot on. Slow things down. And again, that comes back to patience, doesn't it? So,
yes. Well, you're right. You're very true. And I don't think I'm very patient at all.
Well, really, when you think about Australian wine consumers, generally speaking, we are very impatient because most people drink, a bottle of wine within the first 24 hours of buying it. So, a lot of people don't cellar their wine anymore. And a lot of winemakers don't make wine to be cellared. They make wine to be drunk in the next 3-4 years. So but patience is a virtue, and that's what I love about this region of Macedon. Coming back to Macedon, is that there's some beautiful examples of aged Chardonnay and Pinot. You don't get that coming out of other regions of Australia with those two varieties. They age beautifully. You can drink a 10-year-old Bindi Pinot and it's gorgeous, or a Curly, or I hope to be in that vein one day with Wilimee as well, drinking beautifully aged. And that's what I'm trying to look at with the underwater wines, I guess. You get the opportunity to taste a bit of history and something with age on it, rather than the drink now, make wines for now and all that sort of stuff, the juicy, crunchy. Anyone can do that. It's like making beer, I guess. But to make wine that ages is certainly an art.
Absolutely. And like I said, I mean, hopefully, you will have a little bit of a stockpile that, you can draw upon, even if, and I can understand when winemakers say, oh, I've got a little bit for my family set aside. And I think, yeah, absolutely. Why wouldn't you? There's got to be benefits to being the winemaker where you put some aside and say, well, I've got some, but, and then you've got pain in the butt sommeliers saying, can't we just have a bit of back vintage? Oh, it's from my personal stock. No, don't give it to them. Don't give it to them.
Well, I tend to agree. I want my daughters to have open a bottle for their 21st or whatever it is, and then also the next owners, because it's part of the history. I'd love to pass that on to whoever whoever inherits our property or whatever it is or buys it. The next custodians will be able to taste that history and pass that on to the ones after that.
Absolutely. I want to make comment because I know that you're sitting outdoors right now while I sit in a room close to the city, trying to make it as soundproof as possible. You're out in the elements and we can hear all the beautiful sounds of nature. Where are you sitting and what are you looking out onto?
Well, I'm sitting on the mount of Mount Monument, in between two new vineyards that we just planted, on a terrace vineyard, which is quite unusual. I planted a terrace vineyard here last year and the year before. So half the terrace vineyard 1-year-old Pinot vines, 115 and 777, the two clones. And then the other half I planted last spring is 2 different clones of Riesling and 2 different clones of Nebbiolo, actually. So here on a terrace vineyard. And then about 20 metres away there's 6 kangaroos just grazing in between the vines. So yeah, I've got a lovely view of the valley here. There's a few little smoke piles rising in the valley from people doing little burn-offs. Now that autumn is here and fire season's gone beyond us, people are starting to burn a few little piles, and it's a gorgeous afternoon in the Macedon Ranges.
It sounds delightful and all the more reason for me to get down and see it for myself. But I'm very excited about Nebbiolo in your hands. That sounds like some promise for the future to see what you'll do with that. But
looking forward to it.
What's next on the agenda for you? I mean, you certainly have a lot going on and not somebody that sits idly by. You've got someone that sits outside of the box and then always has a new project. I can see that. But what are you really looking forward to other than being done with this vintage and being able to relax?
With the opening of the restaurant Cellar in the next month, and that'll be exciting, and having the public coming through looking at the sculptures. Then really this terrace vineyard, as I just mentioned, over the next 3 years, there'll be a lot of work in getting the vines established, and then hopefully we'll see the first fruit here maybe in the 2024 vintage or 25 vintage, definitely. So you're always crystal balling in that regard. And then also I've got another little project going on the side as well with a dear friend of mine, Jordan from Travail Wines, which is another little winery here in the Macedon Ranges. And Jordan's been leasing a vineyard around the corner, and unfortunately he was killed in a car accident about 3 months ago. And so I've been looking after his vineyard there, and then been making his wines here in the winery, and looking into that business as well, and helping his wife get through that. So that's been a challenge this vintage, but also
important.
A lot of fun. Yeah, important as well in his memory, and a great mate and a great person, and his wife and kids are great people. So hopefully we'll take that their business from strength to strength over the next few years as well. So that's sort of another little thing I've had on the side. If I didn't have enough hours in the day, well, that's certainly tipped me over the edge. So,
well, hopefully it keeps you out of trouble as well. So.
That's pretty easy at the moment. So so that's what I'm looking forward to, is getting this terrace vineyard going, and then I'm really hopefully for all of us in this region to get a nice solid yielding vintage again, because a lot of us are sort of crying out for a nice even weather spell in spring when we have flowering. So that's always our challenge here. But we're in the lap of the gods, and you can't do anything about that.
Well, we talked a lot about crossing fingers and toes, and we are doing that for an abundant vintage for the next couple for you.
Thanks. So, no, it's great. We're in a great region, so we're very fortunate, great people, and As you know, it's not just the winemakers; it's the everyone in the wine industry they're great people, and it's a great industry to be involved in. Whether you're a sommelier, a viticulturist, winemaker, or just working in a wine shop, it's a fun industry to be involved in. So we all look after each other.
Absolutely. I totally agree. I thank my lucky stars that happened to fall into the wine industry when I did. I always ask everyone on the podcast, Ben, if you had to drink 3 beverages for the rest of your life, what would they be and why?
3 beverages? Oh, wow.
You can say alcoholic or non-alcoholic. You can say whatever.
Yeah. No, right at that. Wow, you got me on the spot there. I would say, look, I am very much a wine person. I'm off the beers now. There's too many funky cool cats that I just don't understand in the beer industry. So I like to keep it simple. And I do love Burgundy. Any Burgundies. That was my first vintage in 2003 outside of Australia, and I have a real soft spot, not just because it's Burgundy, but it was my first vintage away from this country. And obviously I make Chardonnay Pinot here, and obviously Burgundy Chardonnay Pinot. So I'd say most Burgundies. I do have a little soft spot for some whiskies from Scotland in the Isles, and also XOs. I love those beverages as well, from cognac. A little bit of Armagnac, but I love cognac. So I guess my good mate in Bordeaux, we drank a lot of cognac at his place in Pomerol. So I guess, beverages always bring you memories. And for me, drinking Burgundy reminds me of being in Burgundy. Likewise with cognac, being at my mate's place in Pomerol. And a bit of Armagnac with, the prune d'Argent, eating those prunes soaked in Armagnac. I guess that's a beverage and a meal.
That's allowed.
And, so I think that would be my choices as off the cuff.
I love it. And you're right. It is all about invoking memories and nostalgia and remembering good times in life. So I can't fault you for any of those. I think all great drinks. I like the fact that you said, any Burgundy. I'm kind of in that vein too. I can't afford it, but,
No, neither can I.
That's why you're not that fussy. I love
it. You take what you can get when it comes to Burgundy.
Very true.
I need more wealthier friends.
Yeah, it's a bit like saying you want to own a boat. You think, no, you just need friends with the boat. You don't need to own the boat.
Here. I couldn't agree with you more.
Ben, thank you so much for joining me today. I know you're busy. I'll let you get back to pressing off the rest of the Pinot, but thank you so much. I promise I will come down and visit one day. But thanks for spending the time. I absolutely love your wines, love what you do, and I wish you all the luck for some very promising, high-yielding vintages in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Shanteh. And the door's always open, so come down and visit. And much appreciated. Great to have a chat.
Thank you. Cheers to you. Thanks, Ben. This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram @overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.